He walked out of my life like I meant nothing, but what he didn't know was that leaving me would be the biggest mistake of his life. I never thought the day would come when the person I trusted the most would turn his back on me. The man I loved, the one I thought was my forever, chose someone else. I felt betrayed, broken, and completely lost. But little did he know, leaving me would ignite a fire inside me, a fire of strength, empowerment, and unstoppable courage. What he thought would destroy me would become his deepest regret. I woke up that morning with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in weeks. The first rays of the sun filtered softly through the curtains, painting my bedroom in warm golden light. I stretched lazily, placing my hands gently over my belly, feeling the subtle movements of the little life growing inside me. For a moment, everything felt perfect. I smiled to myself, thinking about the life I had built with him, my husband, my partner, my love. I never imagined that the same man who had whispered promises of forever into my ears would one day become a stranger, a man capable of betrayal beyond comprehension. Our mornings had always been simple, yet comforting. I brewed my tea, the aroma filling the room, while he sat at the breakfast table pretending to read the newspaper, though I could tell his mind was elsewhere. There had been small signs lately, tiny, almost insignificant moments that I had ignored. The way he would suddenly hide his phone when I entered the room, the distracted look in his eyes, the distant tone in his voice. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. He loves me, I whispered repeatedly, clutching onto every piece of hope I had. But deep down, there was a gnawing feeling, an uneasy whisper that something was terribly wrong. The first time I truly noticed the shift, it was during a quiet evening at home. We sat together on the sofa, the television flickering silently in the background, yet he seemed miles away. He laughed at my jokes, but it didn't reach his eyes. He held my hand, but it felt lighter than usual, like the warmth I remembered was slipping away. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that everyone has off days. But over time, the subtle distance grew into an unignorable gap, stretching between us like a shadow that refused to fade. And then, one evening, I saw it. I had never been one to invade his privacy, but that day, curiosity and unease pushed me closer than I should have gone. His phone lay on the counter, a message. Notification glowing faintly. At first, I didn't pay attention, assuming it was something mundane. But when I saw the words meant for someone else, my world stopped. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I read lines filled with laughter, intimacy, and affection, all directed at another woman. The man I had trusted with my heart, the man I thought loved me more than anything, was sharing his soul with someone else. For a long moment, I sat frozen, staring at the phone as if it held the answers to all the questions I didn't even know I had. The room felt colder, darker, and heavier than ever before. How could someone who promised forever betray so completely? How could he feel so passionately for another while I was still by his side, loving him, trusting him, carrying his child? The questions burned in my mind, but no answer came. Only silence, thick and suffocating. I didn't confront him immediately. I couldn't. My chest ached with an unbearable heaviness, tears silently streaming down my face. I replayed every moment in my mind, searching desperately for clues I had missed. The late nights, the sudden absences, the secretive smiles, pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to see. And with each memory, the pain grew sharper, slicing through me with precision. The betrayal wasn't just about him loving another. It was about the illusion, the life we had built together that now seemed like a lie. Days passed in a blur. I moved through the motions, smiling when I had to, speaking when necessary, but inside, I was crumbling. Friends and family noticed the change in me, but no words could explain the storm raging in my heart. Every glance at him was a test, every word a potential weapon that could reveal the truth he so desperately tried to hide. I kept myself busy, focusing on my child, on work, on anything that would distract me from the reality that my marriage was falling apart silently, invisibly. And then, the confrontation came. I couldn't hold it in any longer. One evening, when the house was quiet, I approached him, my hands trembling, my voice barely audible. "Is this true?" I asked. His eyes dropped immediately, avoiding mine. The silence that followed was more powerful than any denial or confession. In that instant, I realized something profound. He knew the truth was irreversible. His betrayal wasn't just a secret anymore. It was exposed, undeniable, and devastating. I felt a tidal wave of emotions crash over me: anger, grief, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I remembered the nights we had spent planning a future, the dreams we had shared, the laughter that had once filled our home. And now, those memories felt tainted, like relics of a past life that no longer belonged to me. I sat down, my body exhausted, my heart heavy, and I let the tears fall freely. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel everything: the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. But amidst the darkness, a spark ignited. In the depth of my despair, I found clarity. I realized that his choices, his betrayal, could not define me. I was stronger than the pain, stronger than the betrayal. I had a life, a child, and a future that was mine to reclaim. No amount of regret from him could undo the strength I had within me. That night, as I wiped my tears and sat alone in the quiet of the house, I made a silent vow: I would rise above this. I would not let his betrayal break me. And one day, he would realize, far too late, the magnitude of what he had lost. From that night forward, everything changed. I started paying attention to myself, to my needs, and to the life I deserved. I stopped seeking validation from him, and instead, found it within. Every step I took toward healing, every small victory, reminded me that I was more than his betrayal. And with each passing day, the knowledge that he would regret his choices became a quiet, comforting thought, a reminder that my strength was unshakable and that his loss was inevitable. It had been weeks since I discovered the truth, but the memory of that day still haunted me. Every glance at him, every word he spoke, reminded me of the betrayal that had shaken my world. At first, I thought the pain would consume me completely. I imagined I would collapse under the weight of it all, a prisoner to my heartbreak. But slowly, I realized something important. My life did not end because of his choices. My life was still mine to live, and my happiness was still mine to reclaim. I started small. I focused on my morning routines, my health, my mind. I took long walks alone, feeling the sunlight on my face and reminding myself that the world had more to offer than betrayal and grief. I began journaling, pouring my emotions onto paper, confronting my anger, my sadness, my fear. And as I wrote, a sense of control returned to me. I realized that the only thing he had taken from me was trust, but he could never take my strength. Then came the moments that tested me the most. Friends would ask about him, family would mention his name, and I would feel a pang of hurt. But I refused to crumble. I learned to smile even when my heart ached, to respond to his attempts at contact with calm composure, and to guard my emotions fiercely. Each time he tried to explain, to justify, or to guilt me, I remembered the woman I had been before him: strong, confident, and unshakable. He tried to manipulate the situation. At first, he sent messages of regret, apologies filled with empty promises, and words that were meant to pierce my resolve. But I did not respond with anger or tears. Instead, I listened silently, acknowledged the truth within his words, and kept walking forward. I knew that true strength was not in vengeance or in making him suffer. It was in reclaiming my own life, in living fully, and in showing that his choices would never define me. Days turned into weeks, and I began to rebuild my world. I enrolled in classes I had always wanted to take, spent time with friends who truly supported me, and nurtured myself in ways I had forgotten to. I traveled short distances alone, exploring new places, enjoying simple pleasures, and finding joy in my own company. With each passing day, my confidence grew, and the weight of his betrayal became lighter. And then, the inevitable happened. He reached out, finally face to face, after weeks of silence. His eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before: regret. Real regret. For the first time, he realized that the life he had taken for granted was slipping away, and no amount of apologies could bring it back. I looked at him calmly, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. "I have moved on," I said simply. What you lost is not mine to give back." The shock in his expression was palpable. He had expected me to beg, to plead, to fall apart. Instead, I stood there, composed, unbroken, and undeniably strong. That moment marked a turning point, not just for him, but for me. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my power. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had become the fuel for my transformation. Over the next few weeks, he continued to realize the consequences of his actions. He saw me thriving, laughing, and living fully without him. He noticed the way friends and family respected my strength and how people admired my resilience. Slowly, it became clear to him he had lost someone irreplaceable. But for me, that realization was liberating, not satisfying. I did not need his regret to validate my journey. My empowerment was its own reward. By the time I looked back on those months, I understood the depth of what had happened. Betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment had been my teachers. They had shown me that no one could diminish my worth without my permission. They had shown me that the pain of one person's mistake could be transformed into the triumph of my own strength. And they had shown me that true empowerment comes not from making someone else regret, but from never losing yourself in the first place. I had walked through the fire, alone and scared, but I emerged stronger than ever. The man who had left me was no longer the center of my life. He had become a lesson, a reminder, a shadow of the past that no longer controlled my present. And as I held my head high, moving forward with clarity and confidence, I realized something profound. The best revenge is living well, living fully, and never letting betrayal define your story. The days had passed since I had discovered his betrayal, and I had already started reclaiming my life piece by piece. Part 1 had been about shock, heartbreak, and betrayal. Part 2 had been about rising, healing, and finding my own strength. Now, in Part 3, everything comes full circle. The ex-husband finally realizes the depth of his mistake, and I achieve the empowerment I had longed for. Life had begun to feel normal again. I spent more time on myself than I ever had, embracing opportunities one had once ignored. Friends celebrated my strength, family admired my resilience, and strangers, those who had no idea of my past, could see the glow of confidence and self-respect radiating from me. Every step I took, every choice I made, reminded me that my life was mine, untouched by the past betrayals. Then, unexpectedly, he came back. Not because he truly cared, not because he wanted to make amends, but because he saw me thriving. I was working on a project I had always dreamed of, surrounded by supportive people who valued me. He arrived cautiously, uncertain of the response he would receive. The arrogance and confidence he once carried had been replaced by hesitation and regret. He tried to speak, but words faltered. I could see the conflict in his eyes, shame, fear, and longing mingled together. For the first time, he realized what he had lost. I looked at him steadily, my posture confident, my expression calm, my eyes sharp. I didn't need to say much. The silence alone conveyed everything. I had moved on, and he could not reach me. "Do you realize what you've lost?" he finally asked, his voice almost trembling. "I do," I said softly yet firmly. "And it's not something I need from you. My life, my happiness, my peace, they are mine, and no one can take them away." That was the moment of ultimate closure. I could see the regret settle in him, heavy and suffocating, but it no longer affected me. I had taken control, and he had lost the power he once had over my emotions. His apology, his regret, even his tears, none of it could undo the life I had rebuilt. I had turned the pain into strength, betrayal into empowerment, and heartbreak into wisdom. Over the next few weeks, he attempted to reach out again, trying to reconnect, to salvage what he had destroyed. But I remained firm. I responded politely, but without emotional attachment. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart, nor did I allow him to manipulate my feelings. Every message, every attempt, only reinforced my conviction that my life was mine to live fully, and he no longer held a place in it. Meanwhile, my own life flourished. I traveled to places I had dreamed of, started new projects, and embraced opportunities for growth. I surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, and I poured my energy into becoming the person I had always wanted to be: confident, independent, and unstoppable. The pain of betrayal faded into the background, replaced by a steady flame of inner strength that no one could extinguish. And then, as if life itself wanted to reward my resilience, I received unexpected recognition. My work, my passion, my talent, all of it began to attract attention. People admired my dedication, my integrity, and my ability to rise above adversity. Invitations came, opportunities expanded, and I realized that the universe had a way of honoring those who refused to be broken by the choices of others. Finally, the day came when I no longer felt the need to even think about him. He had become a distant memory, a lesson, and a reminder of my own power. His regret was evident to everyone around him, but it no longer mattered. I had achieved what I had set out for: peace, strength, and self-respect. I had emerged from the shadow of betrayal stronger than ever, untouchable by the mistakes of others. The story of my heartbreak had transformed into a story of triumph. I had faced betrayal, endured heartbreak, and risen from the ashes of my pain. The man who had once left me in despair had no power over my life anymore. My happiness, my dignity, and my success were proof that the strongest form of revenge is living well, living fully, and never allowing anyone to define your worth. As I looked at my reflection one evening, I smiled, not because I had proven him wrong, but because I had proven to myself that I was unstoppable. That no betrayal, no heartbreak, no mistake could ever take away the woman I had become. I had survived, I had grown, and I had triumphed. And that, more than anything, was the ultimate closure. Months had passed since the storm of betrayal first hit my life. The man who once held my heart had left it shattered, yet every tear, every sleepless night, and every moment of despair had forged me into someone stronger. I had learned that heartbreak was not an ending, it was a beginning, a test of resilience and inner power. Life had started to feel vibrant again. I had surrounded myself with people who valued me, with friends and family who supported and encouraged my every step. I invested time in myself, my passions, and my dreams. The more I focused on building a life full of purpose, joy, and love for myself, the smaller his presence became in my mind. He was no longer my anchor or my burden, he was simply a shadow from a chapter one had closed. One day, as I walked through a quiet park, feeling the crisp air and the warmth of sunlight, I thought about the lessons I had learned. Betrayal had been cruel, yes, but it had also awakened a fire within me. I realized that the strongest women are not those who never feel pain, but those who rise from it, unbroken, unstoppable, and proud. I had reached a point where I could think of him without anger, without sadness, only with clarity. His regret no longer mattered to me, because my life was no longer dependent on his recognition or remorse. I had rebuilt my world from scratch, and every part of it reflected the strength I had discovered in myself. Then, life surprised me once again. Opportunities one had never dared to imagine began to come my way. My work, my creativity, and my vision were recognized, and people admired the woman I had become. Invitations for collaborations, speaking engagements, and even leadership roles in areas I loved started pouring in. It was as if the universe itself wanted to reward me for refusing to be defeated by betrayal. And then, almost as a final confirmation of my transformation, he reached out one last time. His voice was quiet, his tone filled with hesitation. He admitted, finally, the depth of his mistakes and how much he regretted losing me. But I listened calmly, without bitterness or anger. I understood that his words could not undo the past, nor could they define my present. I replied with simple honesty, I have moved forward. My life, my happiness, and my peace are mine, and no apology can change what I have built for myself. The look of shock and disbelief on his face was almost satisfying, but not because I wanted revenge, rather, because it proved to me that my strength was real. The person I had once been, who had felt broken and betrayed, no longer existed. She had been replaced by a woman who was confident, empowered, and unstoppable. Over time, I realized that closure did not come from him. It did not come from apologies, messages, or attempts at reconciliation. Closure came from within. It came from knowing my worth, protecting my peace, and refusing to let anyone's betrayal define me. It came from living fully, loving myself, and embracing the life I deserved. As I stood at the window one evening, looking at the city lights twinkling below, I smiled. I was free. Free from pain, free from resentment, free from the chains of someone else's mistakes. The man who once caused me heartbreak was a memory, and the woman I had become was my reality, strong, radiant, and unshakable. And that was the ultimate triumph. The story of betrayal had ended, but the story of empowerment had just begun. I had learned that no heartbreak could take away my self-respect, no regret could touch my peace, and no betrayal could stop me from rising higher. My life was my own, and I had reclaimed it fully. The moral was clear: true strength comes not from revenge, but from rising above pain, embracing your worth, and building a life that no one can destroy.